We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers.
Welcome to all of you who have joined us this evening. As some of you know, this is the third webinar that the King and Breaking Silence Coalition has done in the year 2023 to make Dr. King's speech that I get chills every time I hear it, as we were just listening all over again, a living document, and remind ourselves how important it is to our time. And with that, as we have done in the past, I want to invite Myrna, who is joining us as a co-host tonight from Vieques, Puerto Rico, to give us a grounding, a spiritual sense of where we are and what it is we hope to do tonight. Myrna.
Hello, Frank. Pleasure to be with you again. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Aloha, shalom, ciao. Welcome, peace lovers, creators of a new world based on brotherhood and justice. I'm Milna Pagan from the colony of Puerto Rico, Vieques Island, and I'm a member of the Council of Elders. Thank you all for bringing your love and your energy into this conversation on decolonization. Before we commence, let us focus on the beautiful moment before us to calm our spirits and inspire our hearts. Let us breathe deeply together and send our love to all our brothers and sisters around the world. Together, we pray. Let us close our eyes and open our hearts. Ábrete corazón. Ábrete sentimiento, ábrete entendimiento, deja al lado la razón y deja brillar el sol encendido en tu interior. In spite of the challenges, the daunting challenges we face, grant us the perseverance to be true to the light that illumines us. There is a relic from before birth that drives us through life. The light alone can dispel the darkness. Everything is related. Everyone is related. No man is an island. And when we can appreciate nature's power to break through all barriers, we will discover that same power within us. There is clarity and inspiration abounding. Let us make this our altar and cling to it and align our shining light, our inspiration with the path we walk. That's it, Frank. I think we're ready to go.
Thank you, Myrna. I think we are ready to go indeed. We want to emphasize that all who are here tonight are welcome and encouraged to participate in the chat and the Q&A. These are being monitored live. We will engage and respond and answer to the best of our ability. We remind you that in addition to what we will do here tonight, we have assembled an extraordinary collection of resources at the kingandbreakingsilence.org website, and we invite you to go there as well. This is a powerful topic we are grappling with tonight. We will not get it all figured out in just one webinar, but we see ourselves in the flow of what comes from the speech, the Breaking Silence speech on April 4th, 1967, into building the culture of peace and the beloved community. We will start with an overview of the process of colonialism itself. And we will then go to a panel discussion with an extraordinary panel of conversationalists and experts and knowledgeable people on decolonization now. You are invited again to participate throughout, and then we will come back and have some further conversation and close things up. And with that, Bill, roll the tape.
Few stories are as powerful as the stories we tell ourselves. Powerful empires create powerful myths. These myths, these stories, shape societies, shape economies, and even shape the land itself. They profoundly affect the psyche, spirit, and well-being of everyone within the empire's reach. National myths, imperial myths also create silence around uncomfortable truths. The Roman Empire leveled cities, subjugated populations, and installed client rulers all over Europe, Asia, and North Africa. But the Romans thought of themselves as peacemakers and of their rulers as gods. The British Empire likewise thought of itself as a light bringer and liberator, with its agents bringing Christianity and so-called civilization to benighted regions around the globe. But the British were clear that most of their far-flung territories were colonies, and that they, the British, were colonizers. They knew they were extracting wealth. They even celebrated it. But the United States is a little different. In the American imagination, we were never an empire, and we never had colonies. How could we be an empire when our ancestors escaped from an oppressive empire in search of sweet freedom? How could we be colonizers when we rose up against the colonizer king to demand independence and create the world's first modern democracy? The American myth is the myth of original innocence, a myth that to this day allows most white Americans to think that all the wealth of this country is the result of free enterprise and hard work and maybe even God's special blessing. But actually, we are just part of a 500-year colonization story that goes back to Columbus and the European invasion of the Western Hemisphere. The invasion enjoyed the total blessing of the Roman Catholic Church, beginning when Pope Alexander VI proclaimed the doctrine of discovery in 1493. Christians were encouraged to keep the lands they seized for the sake of saving the souls of the colonized. The English Protestants who came to North America also believed that God gave them the land. In New England, they even thought of themselves as the new Israel, and of the Indians as Canaanites who could be conquered, subjugated, or killed in the building of a righteous commonwealth. We were all taught that 1776 was about freedom and self-determination. We were not taught that it was partly about the freedom of white settlers to cross the Appalachian Mountains and seize Indian land in defiance of the Crown's prohibition on such land grabs. Even before independence was achieved, Liberty for these white settlers meant exercising what they thought was their God-given right to take control of a vast new continent and replace its original inhabitants. This theft was accomplished by forced assimilation, removal, and outright extermination of native populations. Romantic American narratives about mountain men and brave pioneers cover up an actual history of genocide. One conservative estimate suggests that there were 7 million natives in North America prior to 1492. By 1880, there were 228,000, a decline of 97%. American empire building exposed a foundational difference between the white settlers and the indigenous peoples. The settlers fully intended to own and dominate the space they occupied. It was part of their religion, whereas the people they displaced and killed lived in kinship with all life and rejected the idea of individual ownership as absurd. They lived lives of reciprocity, sustainability, and communal responsibility. All of this was in stark contrast to white settlers for whom land and nature amounted to inert property to be worked and exploited. As the theft and genocide accelerated, the myth-making intensified. In 1845, a New York journalist proclaimed that it was white Americans' manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Never mind that the so-called free development of the white empire entailed slavery for millions of others who really built the incredible wealth of this nation through centuries of unpaid labor. The Civil War's end only accelerated the genocide. In 1867, General William Tecumseh Sherman of Civil War fame said, "We must act with vindictive earnestness against the Sioux, even to their extermination, men, women, and children." 1 year later, Sherman would give an order permitting the complete annihilation of the tribe. By 1890, the so-called frontier was closed, and the West was won for white settlement. But the colonizing and myth-making would not stop at the Pacific shore. In 1898, the U.S. launched an imperial war against Spain that gave it Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, Cuba, and more. That same year, the U.S. took possession of Hawaii after undermining the monarchy there. In the Philippines, United States troops conducted a brutal counterinsurgency war when the Filipinos declined to accept the blessing of American rule. Our forces perfected waterboarding there. But officially, we were helping our little brown brothers, as U.S. leaders refer to the Filipinos. Apparently unaware that the Filipinos were the only Christian people in Asia, President William McKinley declared that the purpose of our occupation was to uplift and Christianize them. Always and onward into the 20th century, the United States empire would be portrayed by its leaders as a righteous empire, making the world safe for democracy, in the words of President Woodrow Wilson. This was the same president who segregated Washington, D.C., celebrated the Confederacy, and sent U.S. troops into Haiti, Nicaragua, and Mexico. Violence is built into the settler colonial project, and that violence makes its way into the psyches of the colonizers. The greater the violence, the greater the need to sanitize, to proclaim innocence. No one saw this more clearly than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who put his life and his mission at risk by telling the truth about America in his famous Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech of 1967.
And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghetto without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
Our task, then, is to break the silence ourselves, not just to tell the truth about history, but to understand how the myth-making and the persisting violence have touched the minds, bodies, and spirits of both colonizers and colonized alike. Our task is to ask what history requires of us. Our task is to return the stolen land, restore the stolen wealth, and learn to treat one another and all beings with reverence and respect. Our task is to decolonize.
I want to invite Dina to first introduce herself. But one of the things I was so struck with, Dina, that you said is that there is no post in post-colonialism. And I wonder if you could tell us who you are and then pick up on that concept.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. Isquistina Julia Whitaker. And I am a descendant of the Colville Confederated Tribes, the Okanagan Band of Washington State, which is where my mother was from and my mother's whole lineage. And but I was born and raised in Southern California in Los Angeles. And so I live in Southern California now, not in Los Angeles, but not far from Los Angeles. So I'm a displaced Native person. And in my work, it all comes from that place. And as somebody who was directly impacted by federal policy of federal Indian policy of termination and relocation, and that's all part of forced assimilation. So I'm a scholar, a writer, a journalist, an independent consultant. I work at the intersections of settler colonialism and indigeneity, and a wide variety of other topics and discourses. But my main recently field of expertise has been around environmental justice. I wrote a book called "As Long as Grass Grows: The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rock," which was published in 2019. And so in that book, I talk about what environmental justice means for American Indian people specifically. And I don't, even though I use the term indigenous in the title, I now wish that I had been more specific and used the term American Indian, because the more I think about this and the more I talk about it, the more I realize that we have to be really, really careful with our terms, and they're not always interchangeable. So when we talk about environmental justice, we can't not talk about the political realities of the nation state, right? And who is the indigenous that we're talking about, and so and when we bring that level of specificity to our analysis, the way that we talk about it will change. What environmental justice looks like for the Chamorro or the indigenous people of Puerto Rico or the Philippines is not necessarily going to be the same. So we have to be really specific about that. Okay, now to your question about colonialism the post and post-colonialism, that brings up a topic about, getting to the definitions of what we mean when we say colonialism. What is colonialism? And how does it show up in these different places? And as scholars, we talk about two main forms of colonialism. Sometimes they're referred to as franchise colonialism. This is the one that most people think of when they think of, the 500 years of the invasions of the empires of Europe with the British and the Spanish and the French. and the Dutch and others, the Portuguese. So, their voyages to Africa and Asia were this particular type of franchise colonialism that was focused on extracting resources in order to benefit the metropole, like the home empire, home countries. And so this is one type. What happened in the Americas was something different, though. It wasn't just about the extraction of resources. It was about transplanting populations in order to acquire land. So land being a resource, but the resources, the land as a resources was that which can be the host of entirely new societies. And so this is, how North America and South America were impacted by those voyages. So as Patrick Wolf says, settler colonialism is about, it's more than just a historic event, it's a structure. So it comes, and its goal is to eliminate indigenous populations in order to replace, which is always about the land. And so these are different formations, different types of colonialism that plays itself out. And if we understand settler colonialism as a structure, that means that, and not just a historic event, that means it's always ongoing. That means there's no after. There's no after in colonialism, because it's always here. It's always reproducing itself. It's the structure within which indigenous people and everybody are constantly reinforcing these realities. So while you can talk about post-colonialism in Africa, right, with countries like South Africa or Tanzania or any other country there, being having gone through decolonizing because they've kicked out the colonizers, and now they have indigenous rule, however imperfect and problematic it is. It's still the colonizers have left. In the case of settler colonialism, like in the U.S., the colonizers aren't going anywhere. I mean, they are the dominant population. They're not going anywhere. They're constantly there. So they have implanted their societies. So indigenous people are forced to adapt to that, because there will be no post in that colonialism. So when we talk about decolonization, we have to keep all of that in mind to understand to have a different conversation about what decolonial or what a decolonial framework will be.
I hear that as an invitation to bring Lily into the conversation, but also to shift a little bit to decolonization. And one of the reasons, and there are many, that we wanted Lily to be a part of this is she's been involved in an effort at Oakland University, which is a college outside of Detroit, and limited though it may be, we think of decolonization in the context maybe of the struggle at Cop City, at Standing Rock, at Line 3, whatever. But because colonialism is so pervasive, we're all connected to it, and we all can do something about it. And at Oakland University, they did a small thing, but something about the land that the university itself sits on and its relationship to its history and its ancestry. And that's a roundabout way, Lily, of inviting you to introduce yourself and say a little bit about that little tiny decolonization struggle in Oakland County, Michigan.
Thank you, Frank. Maya pabengi kay kayungan. Diri nanda kayo Maya payatu. Good evening and good greetings from my native tongue of Kapampangan. I was born and raised in the Philippines. Grew up there, came over to the to the US in 1995 for graduate studies. But my home province in the Philippines is in Central Luzon. It was close to where the US military bases were, maybe a 30-minute drive, US Clark Air Base. And that was the homeland of the Aita people. And I am saying was because this nomadic hunting and gathering tribe that used to thrive in that area in hundreds of thousands have been effectively dispossessed of their land bases. And I now see when as Dina was talking, that when I think of all the problems that we are facing today in our colonized conditions, that there is something that we need to name. And for me, my personal history and my personal biography led me there. I was raised a pastor's kid, educated, modern school, and was a born again Christian, and yet there was something that halted my full assimilation into the colonial paradigm. Frantz Fanon talked about it in terms of colonialism not being satisfied merely with holding a people in its grip and emptying the mind, the native's brain of all form and content. By a kind of perverse logic, it turns to the past of, I'm reading the quote here, of the oppressed people and distorts it, disfigures and destroys it. And for me, the other thing too that was a factor in my becoming aware of my colonized condition is my tongue's resistance to speaking English. And again, Fanon is instructive here. He says, to speak the colonial language means above all to assume a culture, to support the weight of a civilization. To speak a language is to take on a world, a culture. And that was what my body refused, the assimilation, right? I probably, mentally, consciously, I would have assimilated, except that my tongue's pain around speaking English kept me from being fully assimilated. And because language is such a big part of one's self-expression, it also then fostered a sense of always something not, you're not able to be who you are fully. For me, one of the greatest crimes of colonialism is throwing a people out of sync with themselves. All peoples know how to be. And the fact that, for millennia, we have thrived in our land bases, right, prior to colonization, means that we know how to live on the land until this civilizing discourse comes barging in and saying, you're not human enough. You're not human unless you da. And the foundational break for me is the separation from the natural world. When a people, for me, colonialism begins with the separation, the change, the shift in relationship from a sacred relationship with the natural world, with the earth, and into private ownership, possession. And when you own something, it means you can do whatever you want with it. You can dominate it. It becomes a utilitarian kind of a relationship. And so it's a long roundabout way of getting to your question, Frank. But in Oakland University, where I'm a professor of culture and communication, there was an initiative to have a land acknowledgement. And we have a Native American Advisory Committee composed of both, Native faculty and non-Native, and they worked with the community in crafting this land acknowledgement. And then the question is, if you do a proper land acknowledgement, then you cannot not deal with
Then
rematriation,
what?
rematriation of land, right? And so it's a small gesture. And it's interesting because at the recent climate summit, I gave the land acknowledgement. And I said it's proper that I give it because I am a settler here on Turtle Island. And this realization, even if I may think of myself vis-a-vis the United States as a colonized person, I still remember what the Mohawk scholar Alfred Deyaki said to me during the Q&A after his keynote address in conference. It doesn't matter what brought your people here, even if they were brought by historic colonization. As far as we Native peoples are concerned, you are still settlers. And I had to sit long and hard and ponder, in what way does my presence here as a non-Indigenous person perpetuate the oppression of our Native kin? And a lot of that has to do with the internalization of the premises of this civilizational discourse.
Yes.
That is about demonizing land-taught ways of living. It pretty much disallows any other way of living. I remember when the Europeans first came to the Philippines, they found people thriving in the land, but they were scandalized by the fact that we didn't have a concept of private ownership. The land was
Deeply scandalized and deeply offended.
Yes, and that's part of the doctrine of discovery. I just finished writing a piece on the Regalian doctrine. That's the Spanish version of the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls, right, that authorized the colonial project.
I wonder if I could switch from that for a second here, because we're the King in Breaking Silence Coalition, and we have been brought together for several years now, and to this program by Reverend King's April 4th, 1967 speech, Breaking the Silence, in which he talked about the United States occupation and invasion at that time of Vietnam, and soon enough Cambodia and Laos as well. I bring it up here and now to ask Myrna in particular and Lisa to talk about the militarism aspect of Vieques and Guam, and the nuclear militarism aspect in particular of Guam and the Marshall Islands and so on. Because Myrna, talk about anti-colonialism. Vieques has had a remarkable long struggle with the U.S. Navy.
Yes, and it's not over. It'll never be over, I don't think. I don't think the Navy is ever going to... we just celebrated a 20-year anniversary of no bombs exploding on our land. And we celebrated, yes, because we got the Navy to close the base. And how did we do it? After, 60 years of bombing and military exercises and trying out all kinds of non-conventional weapons, and even to the degree of using depleted uranium on this inhabited island, and then think, how do you get rid of a power like that? You're lost. What do? You organize. You get together. And you organize in different ways at different times. And how did we do it? We invaded the bombing area to stop the bombing. And it worked. It truly worked. I found it almost mysterious that the DOD and the Navy left us out in that area, interrupting their exercises for about a year. The thing this is what, when I studied what is it that hurts the most about this oppression, what hurts the most is that you have to dig very deep to your personal core. Where is it affecting me? So that you can understand the big picture. If you don't understand how it is hurting you, destroying you, devastating you, to come up out of the muck of colonialism and to say, is it my dignity? Is it the dignity? Is the lack of freedom? Is it the lack of education? Is it the economics? No, it's the core of my being that you are destroying. And people say, well, why do you stay there? Why don't you live somewhere else? Because this is where my heart is. This is who I am. And this is what Lily is talking about with identifying with nature. I think that is what has kept us alive here. The place is so beautiful. You know that, Lisa. You've been here. And to see it being destroyed, to know that your family's members are dying because of contamination that came from an intended destruction so that they can study what the effects are. It's when we touch each other this way, when we transmit our love for each other. What am I standing on? Where are my feet grounded? Where is my being happy? Where do I thrive? I thrive in nature. Mm-hmm. That is our solution. And that in America, the awakening of going back to the indigenous ways is a salvation. Mm. For me, I know the Navy is still here because they've projected for 20 more years of cleanup, which they're not even doing cleanup. They're raking the top surface because they are studying where they are going to concentrate the cleanup, the real cleanup. And they think maybe within 20 years that stage may have come. They haven't touched the waters. We have so many boats, bombs, unexploded ordnance covering our coastal floor. And there have 20 years of Superfund cleanup have not touched it. Meanwhile, fishing on the island has practically been eliminated, which means fishermen on the island and how they support their family and how their children grow are getting eliminated. We are being eliminated, and we're tied up in shackles where our government doesn't even run itself. We are run by the empire. We are run by the federal government. And one example, and then I'll turn it over to Lisa. I'm sorry. When we went through Maria, Hurricane 5 intensity, the president of the time, Donald Trump, came with no feeling of humanity, compassion, understanding, acceptance of his responsibility and position in helping the island. He expressed this by throwing paper towels at the public. Here, do something with that. The lack of a sense of dignity, of humanity, is at the core of colonialism, as the love of nature and of our fellow men is at our core. Lisa?
Thank you for that, Sina Marna, for bringing such words of wisdom always to every table that you sit at. I just wanted to start by saying that when we look at militarism, one way I've tried to make sense of its connection to colonization is that in so many ways, militarism is the imperial hammer of colonization. And it also is very much intrinsically linked to globalization and multinational corporations and the protection of their resources. So our island on Guahan, and not just our island, but our region of Micronesia, has been heavily under attack by the Department of Defense and its presence, particularly with the rising threat of China, at least in the US's view. And as a result, not only have we been heavily militarized since World War II, we were certainly occupied territory. We were war zones during World War II, which is probably what most Americans know our island of Guahan for. There continues to be a very rapid rate of military buildup, so much so that in 2006, the governments of Japan and the United States entered into an accord indicating the transfer of Marines from Okinawa, Japan to our island. And if their plan, the way they had originally conceptualized it, and in the absence of people's resistance, because we resisted really hard against that, they would have increased our population by 40%. So when we talk about militarization and we look, it's very difficult not to look at the environmental devastation that happens as a result of militarism. And where there's toxicity in your environment, there is poor health and death, very intrinsically tied. I mean, it's common sense. And so in the Marshall Islands, for example, which was used for atomic testing between the 1970s through, I don't know the exact number of years, period of span of time, but what I do know, and I quote this from their late Senator Tony DeBrum, is that what occurred in the Marshall Islands was the equivalent of 1.7 Hiroshima bombs every day for a 12-year period. Wrap your mind around that. I'll say it again because it's so thick. 1.7 Hiroshima bombs every day for a 12-year period. You know, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki host an annual conference every year on atomic ANH bombs, and you hear the voices of the hibakusha, the atomic survivors, as well survivors from the Marshall Islands, and other places like Chernobyl and so forth. And one thing that has become very resolutely clear for me in terms of the impact of anything nuclear is that humanity's technology does not exist to clean up the mess and the devastation that's left behind by detonating anything nuclear. That doesn't exist. What they did in the Marshall Islands in an attempt to quote unquote clean up, because it's far from clean, is they poured concrete over sites, right? And if you do a real quick Google search, you'll find an atomic dome where concrete was plattered all over. But that's the crazy thing about nuclear waste, is it's not just limited to what could be contained in soil. It seeps through, it's air, it's gaseous. And not only is there the impact at the time of exposure, but the half-life of the radioactive isotopes, many of those half-lives are 1,000 years from now. And it is at the half-life where it is the most devastating, right? Where it has the most damaging effects. And so that being said, I mean, it's just toys that we have no business playing with. It's really.
I want to introduce a personal note, and I see Dina and Lily nodding their heads there. But part of my life has been trying to help white people wake up, which is not an easy task. I'm not whining or complaining. I'm just describing a reality. But in my own family, my wife is recovering still to this day from surgery to remove a brain tumor. She was a toddler on the Marshall Islands during the peak time of nuclear testing. Mm-hmm. We can think that somehow this domination protects us, but the chickens come home to roost, and they come home in our own lives. And we see this so much, back to Dr. King's message, in the violence from which no one in the United States is immune anymore. White parents have to talk to their white children about what might happen to them when they go to school or when we go to a grocery store. These chickens are coming home to roost for all of us, which brings us back, I hope, to the subject of the struggle of a way of thinking about decolonization. And I invite anyone to speak to that. But I know, Dina, you've thought a lot about it. I know we all
have. Yeah, I mean, it's something I teach a class on this. So at the university, I teach a course called Decolonization as Practice. And so I get my students, our students are mostly, I teach in a Hispanic serving institution in San Diego. So most of our students are not white. They are Hispanic, but most of them are also not Native. So even though I teach in an American Indian Studies program, this class is it's an upper division senior level class, and most of those students have never taken an American Indian Studies course and have no idea what they're walking into when they take this class. Like, they have no idea what decolonization even means. And so I get them, and we have to talk about, we have to lay the foundation, and they get to read Aimé Césaire. That's like the first text that they read. So they get, an introduction to it, and they get some basic international relations and history. But it really, I'm always amazed when I teach this class how engaged they are, especially toward the end. They have learned so much that they had no conception of, that it really speaks to them because it draws everybody in. So decolonization, to quote one activist whose name is Nikki Sanchez from Canada, she has this TED talk that she talks about decolonization is for everyone, and in a settler colonial state, it's the work of everyone, like because it's structural, like we have to think about what does it mean to decolonize. I mean, we can indigenize. So we talk about these two different processes, decolonizing and indigenizing. For settler people of settler heritage, it means doing as much unlearning and relearning about their own condition as it does for Native people to understand how colonization has impacted our nations and our individual psyches, as Myrna was talking about. And then there's but there's a really deep deeper conversation, like getting down to the nitty-gritty about what does decolonization really mean. And I had talked to Bill about this, and had talked to him asked if he knew about the essay that was written by Tuck and Yang. It's now been circulating. It circulates widely in academia, called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And so they take on this really difficult topic about what do we mean when we say decolonize, because the word has been co-opted in so many spaces, and it's become a stand-in for other things, and it thus loses its meaning. So their argument is that decolonization must fundamentally it must guarantee indigenous futures. That's really what they're getting at, is that it cannot, the future cannot be about guaranteeing life for non-settler or for settler people. It's gotta be concerned predominantly with what's going to bring life to indigenous communities. And inevitably that means land return. Like, it means a lot of things, but that's one of the things that it means. And so it brings up these very, very, very difficult conversations. We are not conditioned in the settler state to have these conversations. I'm talking about accountability. I'm working on 2 new books, and one of the books I'm working on tackles this topic about what is accountability in the settler state mean. And it's beyond racial justice. It's about understanding the settler state as for what it is, as a colonial formation that is dependent on the eradication of indigenous populations. So
doesn't it also, Dina, extend to, and I picked this up from really what I know about everybody in this conversation, to the domination of rivers, to the pollution of plastic in water, to air pollution, to the relationship between the bad air quality that everybody, we've talked about this earlier, is experiencing now. It's not, and it took me a long time to even realize this was a topic, but if settlers can't redefine their relationship to other humans without redefining settlers' relationship to air and water and animals, and bringing that back, Lily, to because one of the things I was intrigued about in learning about the struggle at, if that's the right word for it, you'll tell us, at Oakland, is, so part of what it's leading to is tree planting, is it not? I mean, isn't that a part of how we try to find our way back to the harmony of all living things?
I'm so glad all the things that have been said here, including our elder Myrna, about the relationship with the natural world. Actually, when I think of decolonization, I think of it as undoing all forms of domination and supremacy, beginning with species supremacy, with human supremacy,
Yes.
because that is part of the default understanding of indigenous people. And all of us, when you think about it, even European descent folks, if you go back far enough in their history, they also had a time when their ancestors knew how to live on the land, right? They also lived indigenously. And so if we open up that historical lens beyond the last 500 years, beyond the last 10,000 years, when we began domesticating plants and animals, you have hundreds of thousands, if not 2 to 3 million years, depending on what you count as a human being, when we lived very differently than we live today. And when we speak about indigenous resurgence, the importance of ensuring in the continuance of indigenous life, that means fundamentally the return of land. Because what is indigenous life if not about being rooted, being taught by the land, being taught by the local ecologists, by the multiple intelligences that live in our particular places. And that reverential relationship with the natural world is what was lost with the project of domestication, civilization building. So you had, even when we began settling and doing farming, we still retained that for at least 5,000 years. We didn't do city-state building, right? We retained that kind of a relationship with the land where even the planting, harvesting was done ritually, understanding that you don't treat the earth as your minion, right? But what happened with the rise of this paradigm of conquering nature? Francis Bacon, the father of modern science, said, "I'd like to put nature on a rack and torture her secrets out of her." The rack was used to torture witches. That fundamentally shifted the human and nature relationship. And then it was just a matter of time before we started enslaving not just plants and animals, but each other, right? Yeah. And even with the end, the formal end of slavery, it didn't. Now we are enslaving minerals, other living beings, because in the indigenous worldview, everything is living, everything is relative. And so if we are really to address all kinds of supremacy, even if it's gender, it's race, we have to go back to the root where we no longer learn our principles for living from Mother Earth herself. And for me, my encounter with the world of our indigenous peoples is what fundamentally opened my mind, because I was very depressed. I, even as a born-again Christian, I was at certain points I was suicidal. And then there was a class in the humanities taught by an ethnomusicology professor who brought the weaving designs, all the arts of our indigenous peoples. And in this graduate seminar that was not even being political, or he was just bringing the cultural products of our people. And I would find myself bawling my heart out. I said, I must be going crazy. Why am I in tears after every class session? And I didn't realize that my body was recognizing there was a bone memory that was getting awakened by my encounter with this very different way of being, right? The sacredness of the relationship with the natural world. So the weaving designs, they are given to them in dreams. Even the embroidery, the master weavers, they say the designs come from the gods, from nature, right? And I just fell in love, and and that is the thing that we need. Spivak, the post-colonial scholar, says our problem today is the rearrangement of desire, right? And another eco-philosopher said, we are not going to see this culture change anytime soon until we change our cultural desire. So the colonizing of our imagination in terms of what we consider as a good life. Like I know of an indigenous tribe in the Philippines that is terrified at being electrified. There was an offer to hook them up to the grid. And they say, we are doing just fine, but that will be the end of us, because with the electrification comes the media, the changing of our mindset. And so I think it's until we change, we fall in love with something, with a different vision of the good life. Cultural theorist Fred Moten said, if you think you understand, not until if you think you understand the terribleness of terror, but without understanding the beauty of what is being killed, you are wrong. And so to have this alternative vision, because there's so much demonization of subsistence ways of living, we can't even imagine, that way of life is like living like an animal, where we are animals.
Yes, we are.
And that prejudice against manual labor, against living on the land, I think is what has fundamentally colonized us, even the best of us. And until we can imagine something different. But we don't even have to imagine, because we still have our living indigenous kin that can teach us.
One of the founders
we can't even have these
net-
conversations. It's taboo to even say any of this stuff. Like you can't, like we have all these, new technology, sustainable, energy and all of that, but we can't, like, there's problems with all of it. It's still all very extractive. It's still all very, there's polluting issues. It's all still a problem, but you can't say it's completely anathema to think about going back to living closer to the earth. I mean, and not being electrified. I think that's a really good point.
Doesn't that speak to the culture of violence, and the violence of the language, and the violence of domination? Again, to bring it back to Reverend King here for a minute, who talked about the United States as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. But the violence isn't just bombs and guns. The violence is a way of thinking, and is a way of not thinking peacefully. And Myrna, I see you don't have to raise your hand, but I think you did.
I'll tell you what I've been thinking just now, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4 women are on screen here. And we 4 are the force that is going to change things, because it is the era, it is the calling, it is the natural development that is needed right now, which is feminine power. feminine energy. I am talking about the power of compassion and love and a feeling of family, of protection, not only of the earth, each other, where there is so much violence in the world right now that if that feeling of a protective mother doesn't flower within every man, woman, and child, that feeling of love and protection.
You know, if there's something that has really, really helped me, it is one of the first principles that I learned from one of our indigenous teachers. He said, we're not here to get what we want, unless what we want is to make beauty that can feed the world and make life jump up and live again. And he also says that all the miseries of our civilization, they come from people insisting on getting what they want when what they want has nothing to do with feeding life and making life jump up and live. And so when I look at our still intact indigenous people, and they live a ritual way of living, they understand that you don't take anything without giving something in return, making an offering of something that is made by hand, or beautiful, eloquent speech, and that actually puts a limit to the taking. I remember one posh Pomo Miwok Indian was telling this story that his people were asking him, well, you know, our elders taught us that you don't take anything without giving something back. So when you look at all of this development, high-tech development, you wonder what did the people give in return? And we understand that if you just take and take and take without reciprocity, without honoring, then something bad is going to happen to you. Well, now the check is coming due.
Something has.
And so for me, until we shift our desire, and I'm finding this for people who are amazed at the natural world, who still retain their wonderment at the little bugs, you know, that little hummingbird that have to migrate. How do they do it? They're not ego-driven. It's not about them. And for me, that's how I understand indigenous life to be. Life is not about us, but about this bigger magnificence, right? That we are just in service of. And even if we don't make it, even to the end, we make beauty anyway. That's what they say. Keep making beauty anyway. What a beautiful way to live.
What a beautiful way to end, I think, because we're kind of out of time.
Oh.
Thank you all. Wow. Wow. Maybe we should have a moment of silence, but that doesn't mean, Myrna, that you shouldn't unmute. That's not the silence we're talking about. As we have been planning this program and have been so enriched by the experience of doing it, if we've said once, we've said many times, we can't do this in just one session. This is a longer discussion. This is a deep discussion, but it is also a discussion that if you go to our website, kingandbreakingsilence.org, what you've heard tonight is only the surface of some of the resources and interviews and YouTube videos and statements and so on that are already available on the website, and to which we will be adding in an ongoing way. There are many articles that have been referenced in the Q&A and in the chat tonight that we will be making available, as well as the recording of this program, which we hope to have up in about 48 hours. Myrna, I want to bring you into this discussion now. And one thing that jumped out at me that Dina said was about how taboo this topic is. And what it made me think of is how taboo breaking the silence was when Dr. King called for a revolution of values on April 4th, 1967, and met with a firestorm of criticism and hostility from the New York Times and from within the movement itself. And we, as the King and Breaking Silence Coalition, and you, as a resident of a colony in a decades-long struggle, bring some perspective to this idea of building a culture of peace within the culture of violence. And I invite you to think out loud about that while I look back here at some of my notes on some of what I saw in the chat and the Q&A and repeat, we're not going to fix this all tonight.
Speaking about breaking the silence and the power that the oppressor has as far as silencing the oppressed, and what has happened in Vieques and Puerto Rico is that the oppressor has placed a junta, an oversight committee on our country, on Puerto Rico, where it's almost like lame duck session or something. Because to tell you, there have been hundreds and hundreds of schools closed, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars taken from our university's budget. The massacre of culture, the massacre of education goes hand in hand with it. And in Vieques, main situation for us right now is that after Hurricane Maria, which was some 6 years ago now, we still do not have a hospital. We still do not have proper care for our community. We have a makeshift emergency locale to settle with, putting people at what? Stabilizing. And then we have to move our people off the island. There are no specialists. There is an off and on service of x-rays, so don't break a leg. And the situation is critical and terrible. And one of the biggest things still is the fact that the uranium is still out there in our hill. The fact that the contamination is carried on because the military continues to do open burning and open detonation. Contamination continues, illness continues. Our situation is sad, tragic. People have to leave and they've left in droves. So our population diminishes. we're in a very, very bad situation.
I want to pick up, Myrna.
Fortunately,
Sorry.
yeah,
I want to pick
There-
up on this idea of contamination in two ways. One of which is let's just talk about nuclear contamination for a minute. Nuclear contamination in New Mexico, in Nevada, in the Marshall Islands, in Guam, in Vieques. Stories just in the last few days about the nuclear contamination in Hanford, Washington, where plutonium and uranium have been processed for decades now as a part of creating nuclear weapons, not to mention Chernobyl, not to mention 3 Mile Island, not to mention this arrogance that humans can dominate, can control, can let loose forces with the idea that somehow we can contain them. And that I'm so glad that in this conversation tonight, both in the chat and the Q&A, there's so much growing awareness of this idea. And I want to bring it back to decolonization because there was a question asked, for example, does it mean the return of land? And the short answer to that is yes. The specifics of how that could work are complex and difficult, to be sure. But of course, all of our national parks, all of our land is stolen, but the national parks in particular is stolen land. One of the videos on the website is from Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, to whom we all owe a great debt of raising our awareness and consciousness of all of these issues. And she talks about the possibility that the Navajo and the land that is their land could become, in fact, its own territory. Not necessarily in the model of the modern nation state of the United States, for example, but in the model of what it is that indigenous people would create if they genuinely had sovereignty, which of course they do not. But everywhere we look, and I'm going to get back to you, Myrna, here in a second, but in the independence movement in Hawaii, in Guam, in the Marshall Islands, there are struggles to rematriate. I like that phrase. Lily used that phrase, to rematriate the land. And there are so many ways that we can do that, small and large. And that must be part of the conversation in Vieques.
well, of course. And the question of sovereignty and the importance, say, well, next week on the 22nd of June, the United Nations will be celebrating its yearly
Colonization.
Oh my goodness. It's decontamination is on my brain. It just doesn't happen. It's frightening. It's frightening when the land is bombed and the life in the land is poisoned. How do you decontaminate, man? And we are now looking at, every day they keep talking about this nuclear threat there in Ukraine.
Yes.
Will that happen? Or is artificial intelligence going to come in and change the logarithm? Or what's going to happen? We are in a world that is confused, chaotic, in many cases lost. How do we change that? We go back to activism and following our deepest beliefs about justice, equality, and brotherhood.
Beautiful.
And it's going to work. That's the truth of life. It's going to work. Am I a crazy optimist? Perhaps, but I'm also a dedicated activist.
Yes.
And we
you
must
are.
all stand up and protect our country, our people, our laws, our life, all of us. It depends on all of us.
Thank you. So decolonization is not a metaphor, and it's also not a hat, but it is a way of thinking, a way of analyzing the world, and so on. And someone in the chat I see is asking, kingandbreakingsilence.org has many resources available, has a list of several organizations doing active work on decolonization. And to bring that all together in a close, we have a closing from a woman who has been a mentor to virtually, I think, all of the panelists and everyone on this call. Kathy Sanchez is the founder many decades ago of Tewa Women United, and she has made herself available to close our program tonight. Thank you again for all of you who have attended, participated. The discussion has been so rich in the chat, the Q&A, and in the webinar, and we will do this some more, guaranteed.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Tahiti. I am Kathy Wimpovi Sanchez from San Ildefonso, Pueblo. I am a Tewa Toa, and I shall do the opening in Tewa for a few minutes, and then I'll transition to English. Umbia Indiandi, ne no hori weke po about akiri bo honori ya in good daga tori, paiki tumpi, paiki mi pindu ere mind ito, hero neho. What's ya hori campo, mubawatsi hori ranko ne nori men. And I shall now transition to English. As we have all heard and we have witnessed these shared amazing lived memories, experiences, giving us radical hopefulness, giving us radical healing, and radically moving with love, we have all heard and witnessed with our minds, our hearts, and our spiritual selves. Thank you for your presence. We were also at the same time being witnessed by our energies of loving life as we are in relations with our life givers of our Mother Earth. So remember, love exists in moments of time. Past as future is right now. You have made the future possible. Thank you all. We are all on one planet, one Earth. All violent acts to gain control over and separate us from relational sisterhood and brotherhood will not satisfy a dying, heartless zombie. Let us not be zombies. We have been shown its dire outcomes. We humans, have we lost our spiritual connective umbilical cord to Mother Nature's allness for life-givingness? This is our quest. Our survival for human kindred spirits is our task. Do not let it fall under the stone pillars of greed, lust, or vengeance. As we gathered here today in multitudes with sisterhood and brotherly love abound, I will bless you with Mother Earth's precious blood, water. Water is here. Water will bless all of us. So, oh, so loudly, as you're being blessed, use your thunderous loudness to proclaim with the power of our voices, our Bing Hong, our precious breath of life. We all have ancestors. They have dreamt of us. Seek and you shall find the hearts. Cry, pour water on the stone hearts. Have mercy on misguided wives, sisters, mothers. Have mercy on misguided husbands, brothers, uncles, and all. So we shall continue to make our heartfelt thoughts become reality for beloved communities. Become that courageous spirit, a spirit rooted with allness for life here and now. Be blessed. We are all radiant, faithful, heart-centered keepers, able to dissolve. Yes, we can dissolve the demon caused by the density of projected violence. We all shall shine light and illuminate that illumination that makes one think our brothers and our sisters are our dear loved ones. They are not our enemies. Do not let that demon make us think they are our enemies. They are not. Help us to seek with eyes of our heart, to see with those eyes, to see the false deadly promises of funding nuclearized weapons of militarism, racism, materialism, and sexism. These are violent invaders of our sovereign bodies. Stop it now. So also justly raise your voices from the fires from our hearts. There is a flame in each and every one of us. This is our healing justice declaration. Put that heart at the center of all your work. Let the thunderous sounds of our voices break the silence. Our transformative energy of brotherly and sisterly love gives us courage, gives us that inner strength to love our Mother Earth, who protects us, feeds us, and puts joy in our minds, our bodies, hearts, and spirits. We belong and must take care of our Mother Earth's homelands, skies, and seas. Let our hearts reach out to each other in a culture of inner peace. Hold each other in comfort. No more fear. Peace be found within each and every one of us. That starts within us. True world harmony starts from within. Let us not forget we are all incredible change makers. Change makers guided by sky stars with light years of instantaneity and within simultaneity, giving loving light. Here we hear it, and it's heard as rhythmic sounds of multitudes, giving our breath of life into prayer, locally and globally. So, oh, so loudly, join into cultures of peace everywhere. Receive these blessings from water, from Avani, our water relative. During our times here on Mother Earth, love her deeply into the aquifers of cleansing and cooling her heartbeat. She so loves us. Remember, we are all water drops into the eternal life memory of Mother Earth's wombfulness. Continue to create that loving relationality, radical love, radical hope, radical healing. You all hold that ability. Never forget that. Live into the witnessing of your daily activities. Live with that love within you, for all of Mother Earth needs to survive. We are that moment when each and every one of us, in hearing these lived experiences, there's many more that need to be raised up to the level of joining in that webbing, in that love of life. So with that, I will close by saying, in Tewa, Watsiang Hobitampo, Watsiang Honan will be made. He want the good that nowhere mean yari. Thank you.
But I wish to go on now to say something even more disturbing. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. And if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and layman concern committees for the next generation.